Good evening. Tonight, the fight to save the cathedral continues. But is it time to move on and just let it go? Or should we be doing everything we can in this city to protect our heritage? Tonight, Jim Anderton joins me, and Lynched starts right now. Welcome to the show. The fight to save the Christchurch Cathedral shortly, but first, is the government's CBD blueprint turning pear-shaped? That's tonight's subject of the memo to Christchurch. Well, it's been revealed the government could backtrack on its overly ambitious convention centre in Christchurch. Green MP Eugenie Sage says she's seen the briefing notes on the business case for the so-called centre and says the government is considering downsizing it. But Earthquake Recovery Minister claims commercial sensitivity and won't release the details, and that's a fair point. Sort of. The trouble is, when taxpayer money is used to fund the project, the rules should change, and we as funders should know more. You see, what economic evidence has the government supplied to produce its grand plans for a relatively small city? Actually, none. You see, the truth is, convention centres across the world are actually loss-making ventures. That's right, they don't make money. That's why the government wants you and I to pay for them. If hotels want them, there's nothing stopping them from building their own conference facilities, you see, nothing at all. But why would they, when you and I will pay for a flash centre? Listen to this. In an article in the Wall Street Journal, which is a rather conservative newspaper, might I add, it says for 2 decades, America's convention centre business has been declining, resulting in a nationwide surplus of empty meeting facilities, struggling convention halls and vacant hotel rooms. How have governments responded to this glut? By building more convention centres, of course, financed by debt backed by new taxes and fees on already struggling taxpayers. And Boston Globe columnist Jeff Jacoby recently commented on this so-called convention centre industry in the States, and he says the whole thing is a racket. Once again, the politicos will expand their empire. Once again, crony capitalism will enrich a handful of wired business operators. Once again, Joe and Jane taxpayer will pay through the nose. How many times must we see this movie before we finally shut it off? How many? And that's this week's memo to Christchurch. Well, a UK businessman, he wants to fund this independent survey to find out what residents really want to see happen to this ill-fated cathedral, and that's fine. You remember this, shortly after the February 2011 earthquakes, he pledged $4 million to kickstart the so-called restoration project of the building, and he says it just needs to be saved. But the other man leading the charge is co-chairman of the Great Christchurch Buildings Trust, Jim Anderton. He joins me shortly, but first, this from Emma Cropper.
It's been a long year for the Christchurch Cathedral. There were grand visions of what would become the heart of Christchurch's city, as well as long battles about how they would get there. Let's take a look back at the journey of the Christchurch's Cathedral over the past 3 years. In April, 3 options for the cathedral's future were given to the public. Option 1 was a full restoration. It would have cost $104 to $221 million and would take up to 22 years to build. Option 2, the traditional cathedral, would cost $85 to $181 million, taking from 5 to 22 years to build. And the third option was the cheapest choice, a contemporary design costing only $74 million and taking up to 9.5 years to build. With $30 million from insurance in their pocket, the rest would be paid for by fundraising.
We want something that is both transcendent and deeply intimate, and I think it's very exciting that we're being asked to look at these 3.
However, the church was met with opposition on their designs. Former MP Jim Anderton was co-leading a group wanting the cathedral rebuilt and believed the price tags on the restoration option were too high.
Ironically, the church has released this, but in 10 days' time we have an appointment with the Court of Appeal in Wellington. And the Court of Appeal is going to rule on whether the responsibility of the Anglican Church is to restore the cathedral, if it can, that's the one that's there now, or to build any old cathedral.
A quantitative surveyor said they were able to rebuild it for just $67 million, a lot more than the $221 million the Anglican diocese had budgeted. However, this did bring safety concerns about the new design.
Our biggest concern is the proposal that they take away the base isolation of the building. Our engineers have said for a building to withstand future seismic events and to have resilience, that it must have that base isolation. We want a strong building, and so we need to be advised by our engineers on that, who have said base isolation is essential. As
July rolled around, they lost the battle to save the cathedral. A court appeal upheld the High Court decision, clearing the way for demolition. The Anglican Church maintains they will still demolish the cathedral, with the modern contemporary design the winning option and the future for Christchurch. Not long after, Christchurch welcomed a transitional cathedral. Located across from Latimer Square, it's been made of cardboard. The latest development came in December. The final bid for campaigners to save the cathedral was lost. The Supreme Court declined an appeal by the Christchurch Building Trust to stop the demolition of the building. After a year of battles and what looks like a finalised outcome, there are still set to be more court battles ahead, with advocates saying in December that it's not over until it's over.
I wouldn't have the party anytime soon if I was the bishop. There's a lot of water to flow into these bridges yet, I can tell you.
3 years ago, businessman and philanthropist Hamish Ogston pledged $4 million to restore the cathedral immediately after the earthquake. This week he came forward to offer more help.
I wish to fund an independent survey of the people of Canterbury and Christchurch to ask them, based on informed and independent assessments of all the relevant engineering and geotechnical research that's now available, what they want to do with the cathedral.
The proposal was well received by the current Mayor Leanne Dalzell, as she says it's important that locals have their say.
I don't think that it is the council's role to do that at the moment, and I've heard a no from Hamish in the background. I think that the clear undertaking that we've had is that the fundraising will be taken offshore, and we will be looking for those that are prepared to make the generous contributions as Hamish has done himself.
Mr Anderton says the total cost of restoring the church is $67 million. After insurance from the church, it will only be $20 million left to pay.
Take the $4 million from Mr Ogston, we've got another $2 million committed. You take 6 away from the 21, you get down to 15. Now, if you look at $15 million to restore that cathedral in the context of a $40 or $50 billion repair for Christchurch, you can see the context is not all that great in terms of the amount of money we have to raise.
Mr Anderton says for those with enough experience in fundraising, $15 million won't be too hard to raise.
Emma Cropper reporting. Joining me after the break is Jim Anderton. Stay with us. You're watching Lynched on CTV. Welcome back. Joining me in the studio now is the co-chairman of the Great Christchurch Buildings Trust, Jim Anderton. Thanks for joining us.
Nice to be here.
Thank you. Let's just touch off for last week's floods. Should the City Council have anticipated the worst, considering it's been flooding since 2011, many parts of Christchurch that is?
I think many parts of Christchurch have been flooding for a few thousand years, actually, to be honest. And you've got a pretty difficult situation here because, I mean, we know that parts of Christchurch flood, but we've had a major earthquake, 11,000 plus aftershocks, and the ground has sunk in many places and the rivers or streams have risen. So the water table's higher, the land is lower, and when you get heavy rain like we did, there's nowhere for it to go. I mean, if you fly over Christchurch, as I did when I first came in here, I looked down and all I could see was water on one side, the sea, and then these big rivers and streams, and thinking, where's all this water going? And there's nowhere for it to go when it rains as heavily as that, except over the top of the banks and into the houses.
Is there an answer to fix this solution? Is it a matter of the government having to step in again and saying, you know what, it's a red zone, it's the only option?
Well, in truth, I think there are some issues about areas of Christchurch that have to be protected if you want to have them for long-term residential accommodation. And there are some parts where you have to seriously ask whether you should be housing. I mean, right through that valley into Hallsville, for example, it's a floodplain. And every time I drive along there now, I see more houses. So one day someone's going to say, well, why were these houses built here? This is a floodplain.
Well, I suppose
we know that already.
You could say that for most of Christchurch,
well,
couldn't you?
it is a problem, and in certain areas we are going to have to, if we want to carry on, we're going to have to do some serious prevention work, flood protection, all the rest of it. I mean, many countries in the world do this, of course, New Orleans, the Netherlands. See what happens if you don't.
Obviously, you're here to talk about the Christchurch Cathedral. We'll get to that in a moment. But while I've got you here tonight, Sarah, are they doing a good enough job? Your mate Philip Burden came out and said they're a waste of space, essentially.
Well, we weren't always mates, of course.
I know. And now you're best buddies.
Look, with all due respect, what we've faced here is one of the most significant earthquakes in world history. The scale of it in terms of the damage and the acceleration of land and all the rest of it was enormous, and we have the most significant insurance cover of any country in the world ever on an earthquake. So you've got problems to Africa, and my view is that too much has been said about the way in which this is all going to be fixed and how quickly it's going to be fixed, starting with the Prime Minister, Mr Key, saying once no one in Canterbury would be worse off as a result of the earthquake. Well, as soon as I heard that, I knew that would be blown out of the water. Everyone's worse off in Christchurch as a result of the earthquakes, and too much has been said about how quickly this is all going to be fixed. And so people had the view that next month, 6 months, 9 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and it goes on. I think it would be much better to put the hard facts on the table. We are in a serious state of reconstruction here. The cities like Christchurch around the world that have had this devastation inevitably come right, but it's not a 1, 2 or 3 year project. I mean, Dresden, which was bombed by the RAF into the middle of next century, took 60 years to rebuild structures that we think could be rebuilt in a few years, and that ain't going to happen. So
in a way, then, aren't you suggesting that we need, Sarah, even more or even longer than 2016 then?
No, I think the CERA was an emergency response. The government is
So what's its role now then?
Well, I think basically its role is to make sure that there's a transition back to the city running the affairs of Christchurch. We've already lost one democratic institution, ECAN, to administration. We don't want to lose another, and basically what we want to do is get control of our own affairs again. But it's going to be a cooperative venture. I mean, no area in New Zealand could survive this kind of disaster without the assistance of the government, and that would go for Auckland or Wellington or anywhere else. So, you know.
Let's get on to the Christchurch Cathedral. That's why you're here tonight. Why are you so obsessed with this?
I don't think I'm obsessed. I come from a city, Auckland, dare I say it. Don't say it very loudly in Christchurch.
You don't say that.
Well, I do. I lived there for 46 years, actually, before I came here, and I'm glad I did come to Christchurch. But I watched Auckland destroy its heritage as a young person in Auckland, as a married person, and so on. The cemetery in Auckland in Grafton Gully, the gravestones on which were written the history of Auckland, was bulldozed, and they ran a motorway right over the top of it. His Majesty's Arcade, which was one of the most beautiful theatres you'll ever see, they put a steel ball through it. While I was on the City Council in Auckland, they tried to knock down the Civic Theatre and the Town Hall. I was part of the group that stopped them. Now, when I came to Christchurch, I looked at all these beautiful buildings, like the Gothic precinct from the museum through the art centre and the provincial chambers and on to the cathedral, and I thought, what an incredible city to have preserved this kind of heritage. If you drive into the city now, quite often I get completely disoriented. I wouldn't know where I was because most of the landmarks, most of the things that you knew about Christchurch are gone. Now you can knock.
But that is our reality, though, Jim Anderton. You're right. Most of our buildings are gone. So why save another one then?
Well, here's another reality.
This is just an emotional argument, isn't it?
No. Here's another reality. The irony is the few that we have got left, the Arts Centre, that was badly destroyed. There was $300 million worth of insurance on that.
We're keeping that.
Absolutely, because we had $300 million worth of insurance on it. The cathedral, if you put a price on its actual physical value in terms of replacing it stone by stone and rebuilding it the way it was, probably our advice is around $300 million. How much was it insured for? $40 million.
Well, so most of the city
massively underinsured.
Yeah.
But the Arts Centre wasn't. The Arts Centre was fully insured.
All right.
And it's being rebuilt.
But
now,
I mean, look, in a way, that's a red herring to this argument. The thing
no,
is,
it's not,
though,
because money is the issue often in these things, and the bishop often says that. And yet, when somebody comes along and offers $4 million for the restoration, she's criticising the whole thing because she didn't get an invitation.
But why won't you let the church decide what it wants to do with its own building? What right do you have, though?
Well, here's the thing. That the land on which the cathedral stands was given to it by the City Council of Christchurch. It was called the Provincial Council then, but the Provincial Council gave the land to the Anglican Church to build the cathedral on. Much of the money for that cathedral, both in terms of its build and its maintenance over the years, has come from the Canterbury region, from the city of Christchurch. It's an historic building, it's a cultural icon.
Well, once again, with the greatest respect, this is just coming down to an emotional argument, isn't it?
There's nothing emotional about the fact...
Have you asked what young people want on this building?
Well, actually, yesterday at the press conference, or Tuesday, with the Mayor and Mr Ogston, we had the President of the Student Army, Bridget Williams, representing young people and their view of the future. You can... It's like the Chinese philosopher said, a city without its old buildings is a city without memory. If you want to have a city that doesn't remember its heritage or count it for anything, just knock down everything and just put up some concrete slabs and see how you get on.
We need to take a break. Coming up, more from Jim Anderton, your feedback and tonight's final comment on the true spirit of community across Canterbury. Stay with us. Welcome back to Lynched on CTV. My guest tonight is Jim Anderton. Jim, is it true that restoring the cathedral is a cheaper option than replacing it? Because isn't this what it comes down to? The church says we need to get rid of it, bulldoze it down, that's the cheaper option, and replacing it. And you say? Depends
what you want to replace it with. I mean, for example, if you replace it with a $40 million Las Vegas type chapel, it'll still look like that in a 300...
Oh, that's about...
Well,
Are you talking about the contemporary design?
Well, if the church spends the money they've got, which is what the general impression is, $40 million will get you a $40 million building. If you restore the cathedral, you've got a $300 million building that's been restored. You can restore the cathedral for $67 million, according to the best and most reputable quantity surveying and engineering advice we've received. They
would say you're not taking into account the escalating costs.
Yes,
what do you say to that?
Well, here's the escalation. They've taken the view that 17 years will go by before anything happens, and so they've escalated the price 2 or 3 times just to allow for that. If anyone thinks that people like myself and Philip Bird are going to sit around for 17 years doing nothing about that, that's ridiculous. We can start tomorrow. We could have had the thing half built by now if we'd started in the first place after the earthquake. The reality is that that building is probably 70 or 80% intact. And so if you restore it as it is, you have to strengthen it and so on. You don't have to rebuild it. So the price between the 67 that we're saying and the 90-something that the church says, take out their $10 million for fundraising. Philip Burden and I and other people I know will raise that $15 million gap for free. Nothing. We've offered that plenty of times.
All right. The church have made a statement to us, and from Jason Rhodes, the spokesperson.
Rhodes, yes, I know.
He says Mr. Anderton has been quoted as saying he would follow the court's decision on these matters. He's meaning
I would what?
You would follow the court's decision. In other words, you would accept any court decision, whether that's the High Court, the Appeal Court, the Supreme Court.
What was the Supreme Court's decision?
He says he has not he clearly is not continue with this, and he continues to challenge the legal owners in and outside of the court, and he needs to stop.
The interesting thing is Mr. Rhodes is the Anglican Church's communication person. He lives in Auckland. Isn't it interesting that the Anglicans are communicating us with someone who lives in Auckland? What does he know or feel or have empathy for in Christchurch? He lives in Auckland. If he wants to comment on Christchurch and be part of it, let him come down here and live here. Then he can live through the earthquakes and the floods and everything else. The second thing is, in terms of following the court is still waiting for 2 hearings. One is to hear from the Anglican Church on the consultation strategy they had under the decision of Judge Chisholm, and the second is, is the Anglican Church going to replace the money they took out of the funds for insurance on the cathedral, for the cardboard cathedral? Now, those are yet to be heard. They'll be heard in April. So then we're going to hear that, and the reality is that the Anglican Church from the very beginning, the bishop has said from the very beginning she does not want this cathedral restored.
And why can't you accept that though?
Because...
What is wrong, for argument's sake, Jim, what is wrong with the contemporary design? Plenty of people quite like it.
Well,
why do you not like it?
Well, here's the thing. It's not a matter of whether I like it or not, because my...
well, it is, because you want the original design restored.
It's nothing to do with my personal view on any particular design. If they're going to build another church, any church they build is over to their architects and them and all the rest of it. We're talking about the reality that if you leave New Zealand, as many New Zealanders do, and go around Europe and the world, isn't it amazing? We travel all around the world to look at buildings like this that have been restored over centuries, and we admire them, whether they be the Constantine Cathedral in Istanbul, or whether...
But why can't we do what New York did? Their Twin Towers collapsed. They've now got a beautiful Freedom Tower. What's wrong with that? Why don't we show the rest of the world that we're getting on and doing it without the need of all this court action? Why can't we be an example to the rest of the world that we're getting on and doing it without going through all this legal avenue and all this legal challenging?
If this had been the Westminster Cathedral...
But it's not, though.
No. Well, actually, for New Zealand and Canterbury, it is. It's the equivalent. It's the most iconic building in the city. It actually stands as a masthead for the City Council's letterhead. That's how focal it is. And so we're saying we can go around the world and admire how other countries look after their historic places and how they rebuild them and they look after them and all the rest of it. But here in New Zealand, we'll just knock them over with a tilt slab and get on with it.
Final question. When will you give up this fight?
Oh, I think when it's clear that the people of Canterbury no longer want anything to do with it.
And how will you know that?
Well, this is one of the things that Mr Ogson said he's going to take and pay for an independent survey of opinion, and we'll get some answers.
We're out of time. Jim Anderton, thanks for coming to the programme. Appreciate your time tonight. All right, feedback time now on facebook.com/Lynched in NZ. I asked you whether you thought Labour leader David Cunliffe is the right man to lead the party to victory at this year's elections. Miranda Finlay says, I truly believe Labour will head toward victory, no matter who's in charge of the party. Jenny Gifford says, I personally think he has the personality of Ken. Barbie's boyfriend, that is. I would love to see Labour oust National, but can't see that happening anytime soon with David Cunliffe as leader. And Simon McDiamond says, I hope David Cunliffe wins the election, but we're all forgetting, or quick to forget rather, that John Key is well liked in the North Island, so I don't think Labour stands a chance. Thank you so much for your feedback. Keep it coming to facebook.com/Lynched in NZ. We're out of time. We'll see you next week.